How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the Dragon's Den. Today, we're going to do a deck tech for Ulamog the Defiler. This is going to be a full 100 card deck tech. Obviously, this is just how I would choose to build the deck, and I encourage you to make any changes to this deck list that you would see fit if you decide to build this. This is just the way I would build it, and a general idea that may be able to help you if this is a commander you want to pursue building yourself. So let's get started. First, we're going to take a look at Ulamog the Defiler, the general for the deck. Ulamog the Defiler is a 10-cost colorless creature that is a 7/7. When you cast this spell, target opponent exiles half their library rounded up. It has ward, sacrifice 2 permanents. Ulamog the Defiler enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the greatest mana value among cards in exile. Ulamog has Annihilator X, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on it. So, Ulamog does a lot. So upon cast, even if it doesn't resolve, automatically you are taking half of one of your opponent's libraries out of the game. This can be super useful if you're playing against a combo player. You can target the combo player and make them mill half their library, and the chances of them having at least one of their combo pieces in that half of their library is very, very high, and you may be able to effectively neutralize them in the game without actually killing them. So that can be super useful. Or you can just choose to maybe target a player you know is going to be playing some very big spells in their deck, so that you can put a bunch of 1/1 counters on Ulamog and it have an crazy Annihilator. The fact that this thing has ward, sacrifice 2 permanents also makes it extremely good, because it's most of the time I feel like that will be enough to kind of deter people from wanting to target it. Because now, not only are you getting rid of 2 of their permanents, you're also taking a card out of their hand. So really the only way I see Ulamog leaving the board in most cases is a mass board wipe, which forcing somebody into using a board wipe just to take care of one of your creatures is extremely strong, and just the fact that you can get value on cast makes this guy very, very good. And colorless has gotten a lot of support, so you can actually build a very strong deck around Ulamog. So let's get into the cards that we're going to have in the deck, and I think we're going to start off with the ramp package and kind of show how are we going to accelerate to that 10 mana as fast as possible. We're going to start off with Soul Ring. That's obvious. Everybody runs Soul Ring. 1 mana to make 2 mana. Super good. Mind Stone. It taps to add a colorless. You can also sacrifice it to draw a card. It can be a little hard to draw cards in colorless, so this might just help smooth you out in the later in the game. Thought Vessel. You have no maximum hand size, and it taps to add a generic, and it's only a 2-cost artifact. This can really help you as whenever you are drawing cards or you're holding up the big spells in your hand for later in the game, you're not going to have to discard your good stuff to be able to get to that point. You'll be able to hold on to it and actually get to use all the cards in your hand. Basalt Monolith, just a decent thing that kind of help you accelerate in the early game, and it can be good if you choose to untap it, if you have 3 extra mana, or if you're running another card that we'll see later in the deck. Forsaken Monument, this does more than just helps you ramp and play more spells in a turn. So it's a 5-cost legendary artifact. Colorless creatures you control get +2/+2, so now all of your Eldrazi creatures, all of your colorless creatures, your commander, all of it are going to be getting pumped. Whenever you tap a permanent for colorless, add an additional colorless. This is extremely good. It doubles up your mana, and it's not just lands, it's your permanent, so all of your artifact ramp and everything else, all of your lands, you're doubling your mana, making it very easy to cast lots of really big spells. And whenever you cast a colorless spell, you gain 2 life. Every spell in the deck is colorless, so now every time you cast a spell, on top of that, you're gaining 2 life to sort of pad your life total a little bit and maybe help you sustain yourself a little bit more in the game. Next is Ugin the Ineffable. Colorless spells you cast cost 2 less to cast, so all of your spells cost 2 less to cast. It has a +1. Exile the top card of your library face down and look at it. Create a 2/2 colorless spirit creature token. When that token leaves the battlefield, put the exiled card into your hand. So, essentially, he'll build up the top of your deck. You put all those cards onto the battlefield. Then if somebody chooses to board wipe, well, now all of your spirits die, but then you draw all of those cards. And then -3, destroy target permanent that's one or more colors. It's removal on a stick. It's very good. This is amazing in this colorless deck. Next, we have Hedron Archive. It's a 4-drop that taps for 2. And you can tap 2, sacrifice it, and draw 2 cards. It's draw on a stick, which is going to be helpful. Dreamstone Hedron serves the same purpose of you cast it for 6, it taps for 3, but you can also pay 3, sack it, and draw 3 cards to help smooth you out later in the game. Thran Dynamo, an artifact that you pay for and it taps for 3, a little bit more acceleration. Golem's Eye, you pay for it, taps for 2, not quite as good, but still a decent piece of acceleration for a deck like this. Sisei's Ring, also a 4-drop that taps for 2, another very good card in this deck. Artifact ramp is going to be the key to ramping in this deck. Urza's Incubator. I'm going to run Urza's Incubator because the vast majority of all the creatures in the deck are Eldrazi. So while there may be a few exceptions and a few cards that are not Eldrazi, Urza's Incubator is going to help the vast majority of all of my creatures cost 2 less, and that's extremely useful. Liquid Metal Torque, just another 2-drop acceleration artifact. It That Heralds the End is a 2-drop 2/2 Eldrazi drone. Colorless spells you cast with mana value 7 or greater cost 1 less to cast. Other colorless creatures you control get +1/+1. So this is a colorless lord, and it's making all of my 7 cost or greater cost 1 less to cast, which is extremely useful, as in an Eldrazi deck like this, the vast majority of your creatures are going to hit that 7 mana mark, so it's also just reducing the cost, which can be better than just having regular mana ramp. Now we're going to get into some of our creatures and everything, starting with Ulamog the Infinite Gyre, which is an 11-drop 10/10 Eldrazi. When you cast Ulamog the Infinite Gyre, destroy target permanent. It has Annihilator 4. It is indestructible. When Ulamog is put into your graveyard from anywhere, its owner shuffles his or her graveyard into his or her hand. This thing does a ton of work. So it's removal on a stick. It's going to help you be able to control the board and everything, because there aren't a lot of single target removals in colorless, but there's quite a few that are stapled onto creatures like this. So that's very good. Annihilator 4, you want to be swinging Ulamog, and now you're forcing people to sacrifice permanents when you do it. Annihilator is just a busted mechanic, and it's on a lot of creatures in this deck. And then it having indestructible just makes it really hard to remove once it hits the board. It'll have to be some sort of max exile or single targeted exile. So exiling is a little bit harder than destroying, but in Commander it's not going to be too uncommon, but it'll still be much harder to get rid of than just some regular old creature. Next we have Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger. When you cast Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, exile 2 target permanents. Again, removal on a stick. It has indestructible. Whenever Ulamog attacks, defending player exiles the top 20 cards of his or her library. This plays into like you casting your commander, so now you're going to exile 20 cards off of somebody's library too, giving you another chance to get really big spells into exile, putting more 1/1 counters on your commander. And that's really just Ulamog. All 3 of them are very powerful cards that are going to help you remove permanents, remove things from people's library, and just really put in some work. Next we have Zuladoc Void Gorger, which is a 6-drop 7/4 colorless spells you cast from your hand with mana value 7 or greater have Cascade. I don't really need to entirely explain why that's good. The vast majority of the creatures in this deck have 7 or greater, so Every time you cast one of your big spells, you're getting 2 free spells. It could be other Eldrazi, it could be your mana ramp pieces, it could be some of your card draw pieces. It could be a number of very good things. So, Zuladoc, obvious include. Kozilek, Butcher of Truth. When you cast Kozilek, Butcher of Truth, draw 4 cards. It has Annihilator 4, busted. When Kozilek is put into a graveyard from anywhere, its owner shuffles his or her graveyard into his or her library. So, to be a 12/12 with Annihilator 4, and it's going to draw you 4 cards when it enters, it's extremely good. It helps you kind of fill your hand back up whenever you cast it, helps you get rid of things when you swing it, and protects you from mill, which is it protects you from mill, and Ulamog the Infinite Gyre protect you from mill. There's enough cards in this deck that are going to make it to where if you're playing against a mill deck, mill is not a strategy that can beat this deck. Next we have Kozilek the Great Distortion, which is a 10-drop 12/12. Whenever you cast a spell, if you have fewer than 7 cards in hand, draw cards equal to the difference. So it fills your hand back up. It's a 12/12 with Menace, so it's going to be hard to block and it's going to throw a lot of damage around. And discard a card with mana value X, counter target spell with mana value X. While that may not be something you'll be able to do extremely consistently, it can help you counter some spells that may help you protect your board or just keep your opponents from winning the game if you just so happen to have the right CMC spell in your hand. And to have that just stapled onto a big 12/12 Eldrazi that fills your hand up, it's just a bonus. Next we have Kozilek the Broken Reality. I was a little mixed on this card when it first got spoiled and everything because I don't think it's necessarily just crazy strong, but it can be good because it can also draw you 4 cards because it says when you cast this spell, up to 2 target players each manifest 2 cards from their hands. For each card manifested this way, you draw a card. So you get to pick something out of your hand to manifest, so you can put down your creatures or whatever so you know you'll be able to flip them and that's no issue, and then you replace those 2 cards as soon as you put those 2 down. Now you can choose an opponent to also manifest 2 cards, and this can be good. Say you're playing against somebody you know has a bunch of non-creature spells like instants and sorceries. You can choose them and effectively turn that into an extra 2 cards for you to draw and take cards out of their hand in a sense. But in a lot of instances, I feel like you're sort of giving your opponent something in a way because they get to pick stuff out of their hand and they may have good targets in their hand just to draw 2 additional cards. But the reason that this card is really in the deck is that other colorless creatures you control get +3/+2. So it's really, really, really going to pump your board up considering every creature you have is colorless. And even the 2 cards that you manifest out of your hand are instantly going to be 5/4s. So before you even flip them, they could really put in some work. Next is It That Betrays. It's a 12 cost 11/11 with Annihilator 2. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent, put that card onto the battlefield under your control. This is really good at shutting down aristocrat-style decks because you get to effectively steal their creatures. Or whenever you're just swinging around all of your creatures with Annihilator, if they want to sacrifice their creatures, then you get those back, and it can really help sway the game in a big way. Next is Void Winnower. Your opponents can't even, is basically what this says. It's a 9-drop 11/9. Your opponents can't cast spells with even. Converted mana cost 0 is even. Your opponents can't block with creatures with even. Converted mana cost. That is the easiest way to explain what this card does. Your opponents can't even, shutting down half their decks on average. Oblivion Sower, 6-drop 5/8. When you cast Oblivion Sower, target opponent exiles the top 4 cards of his or her library. Then you may put any number of land cards that player owns from exile onto the battlefield under your control. This is stronger than it looks on its own considering your commander exiles half of somebody's library. So if you look at it statistically, whoever you target, in theory, half of their lands are going to be in exile. Then you're adding an extra 4, and then you're effectively stealing half of the lands in their deck and really accelerating yourself in a humongous way, allowing you to cast even more spells on each of your turns. Then we have Sad Robot, or Solemn Simulacrum. When it enters, you search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped. When it dies, you draw a card. It helps you ramp a little bit and helps you draw a few cards. It's a good blocker. Sad Robot, very good in a colorless deck. Conduit of Ruin, 6-drop 5/5. When you cast Conduit of Ruin, you may search your library for a colorless creature card with converted mana cost 7 or greater. Reveal it, then shuffle your library and put that card on top of it. The first creature spell you cast each turn costs 2 less to cast. So, it's also reducing your mana, at least for the first creature that you cast on each of your turns, which is what you want to be doing, is casting Big Eldrazi, and it tutors up a creature that you can instantly take advantage of that with. So it can go get your Ulamogs, your Kozileks, your Zuladoc. It can go get some of your really, really big, awesome Annihilator creatures, and tutors are always good, so to have a colorless tutor that helps further what your deck is trying to do is extremely good. Flayer of Loyalties is a 10-drop, 8 of any color, and 2 waste, 10/10. When you cast this spell, gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. Until end of turn, it has base power and toughness 10/10 and gains Trample, Annihilator 2, and Haste. This has Annihilator 2 and Trample. So this is good because you can steal one of your opponent's really good creatures or something like that may have its own, really good effects whenever it attacks or deals combat damage or something along those lines, and then you're giving it a 10/10 Annihilator 2, Trample, and Haste. It just gives you a second humongous creature to be swinging around making people sacrifice permanents, which is really, really good. Wandering Archaic, I'll admit, I do not know what the back side of this card does, but the front part of it is why I wanted to run it in the deck anyway. Because it's a 5-drop, 5/4. Whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, they may pay 2. If they don't, you may copy the spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. So the front part is just the whole reason the card's even in the deck to begin with, because now every time your opponents ramp, chances are they're not going to want to pay the 2. You're going to ramp. If they remove something, you're going to be able to remove something in most cases, because people are not going to want to pay the 2 mana. So you're just going to copy a ton of spells off of this and get a ton of value. Artisan of Kozilek, 9-drop, 10/9. When it enters the battlefield, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So whenever it enters, reanimate something. So if they remove something good off of your board, you can get something good back. And this thing also has Annihilator 2 stapled onto it. So that's just the cherry on top, I suppose. Next we have Bane of Bala Ged, 7-drop, 7/5. Whenever Bane of Bala Ged attacks, defending player exiles 2 permanents he or she controls. This is just a 7-drop, 7/5 that essentially has Annihilator 2 without being a keyword. And this exiles instead of destroys. So it is a better Annihilator 2. Next is Endbringer, a 6-mana, 5/5. Untap Endbringer during each other player's untap step. You can tap Endbringer, deals 1 damage to target creature or player. You can pay 1 waste and tap it. Target creature can't attack or block this turn. Or you can pay 2 waste and tap it and draw a card. Endbringer can be, I looked at it and I read it, and I'm like, this thing can be really, really versatile, because if you have a turn where you don't really have a lot you can go on, maybe you don't have a lot of cards in hand or something, you can hold up your mana and pass the turn, and you can draw 3 additional cards before your next turn, on average, because most Commander games have 4 players. So you'll be able to draw about 3 extra cards, fill your hand back up, and it's just really, really versatile in that way. And then you can free attack with it on your turn, or even just use it on your turn to ping something or do any of these effects. It's just a really versatile card. Next is Abstruse Archaic, is a 4-drop, 3/4 with Vigilance. You can pay 1 and tap it, copy target, activated or triggered ability you control from a colorless source. You may choose new targets for the copy. It's in here because it can double your Annihilator trigger. So say your commander has Annihilator 5, you swing it, you tap it, you pay 1 and tap this guy, now your Ulamog essentially has Annihilator 10, which is insanely good. So doubling up Annihilator is awesome, and this guy can do that. Next we have Lightning Greaves, because it's a 2-drop with 0 equip, which means the second you play your commander, you equip the boots, and you can start swinging that big Annihilator trigger just everywhere, and it'll protect it, and you can protect any of your other big creatures that may need protecting. Lightning Greaves is super good, especially in this instance. Same thing with Swiftfoot Boots, Haste, and Hexproof. So being able to add that protection and make something hasty, extremely good. Next we have Emrakul, the Promised End, 13-drop, 13/13. It costs 1 less to cast for each card type among cards in your graveyard. Whenever you cast Emrakul, you gain control of target opponent during that player's next turn. After that turn, that player takes an extra turn and has flying, trample, and protection from instants. So it's very hard to get rid of because a lot of single target removal is instants, and then you're gaining control of a player during their turn. So you can absolutely you can take control of their turn. You can absolutely wreck their board, make the worst possible plays and everything else, and then pass back to them. And you've effectively destroyed their board state, or use their board state to take somebody else out of the game. And, and in the process, you've given yourself a 13/13 with flying and trample. So, Emrakul, definitely worth running. Breaker of Creations, 6 mana, 2 waste for an 8/4. Whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each colorless permanent you control, which is going to be a lot of permanents. Remember, your lands are colorless, so you will be gaining a lot of life when you play this guy. Hexproof from each color, so anything that is colored at all cannot target this guy or block this guy. Extremely good. And it has Annihilator too, stapled on, because why would it not have Annihilator? Super good card. Blightsteel Colossus. Yes, this is not an Eldrazi, but it is a big, awesome, colorless creature. It's a 12-drop 11/11 with Trample, Infect, and Indestructible. If it would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, reveal Blightsteel Colossus and shuffle it into your owner's library instead. It protects you from mill. It one-shots players if they can't block. It forces them to block. And it is a humongous threat on the table. Blightsteel Colossus is an awesome card. It might be my favorite creature that has ever been printed. I absolutely love Blightsteel Colossus. This deck, a lot of what it does, it doesn't necessarily say Eldrazi. It says colorless creatures, so a lot of these benefits, Blightsteel gets them too. Next we have Eldrazi Mimic. 2-drop 2/1. Whenever another colorless creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may change Eldrazi Mimic's base power and toughness to that creature's power and toughness until end of turn. It's just a good early game, small creature to be able to play later in the game. When you're playing your bigger creatures, you can make this guy big, have an extra swinger. Ugin the Spirit Dragon. This is one of the MVPs in the deck, no doubt. 8-drop Planeswalker that comes in with 7 loyalty, plus 2. Ugin the Spirit Dragon deals 3 damage to any target. This could be removal on a stick. Minus X. Exile each permanent with converted mana cost X or less that is 1 or more colors. So that minus ability will never, ever hit your board. And it can effectively wipe all of your opponent's boards out entirely for you to be able to get in for more damage or take care of, their boards if they kind of got out of control, because there aren't a lot of mass board clears in colorless. Then if you happen to get it up to that ultimate, which is a minus 10, you gain 7 life, draw 7 cards, then put up to 7 permanent cards from your hand onto the battlefield. Most of this deck is big, awesome, strong Eldrazi. So you gain 7 life, you draw 7 cards, put the 7 best cards in your hand into play. That's insanely powerful. This is 100% one of the all-stars in the deck. Next we have Breaker of Armies. It's an 8-drop 10/8. All creatures able to block Breaker of Armies do so. The way I've seen this is most effective is not necessarily to wipe a player's board, which you could do if your opponent just has 3-4 little creatures. You can swing Breaker of Armies at them and effectively wipe their board. But the way I've seen this is, where do you want to get your big creatures in? It could help you sneak in lethal damage. Say you've got a token deck that you're playing against, and he's got, 100 tokens or something, and you can't really get in for damage. Well, you swing Breaker of Armies along with your other stuff at that player, and all of those creatures have to block Breaker of Armies, allowing your other creatures to get through for the damage. You're effectively sacrificing Breaker of Armies, but you're getting a free attack on a player with your other creatures. That's how I see this card being most useful. Then we have Reality Smasher. It's a 5-drop 5/5, trample, haste. Whenever Reality Smasher becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, counter that spell unless its controller discards a card. So it's just a 5/5 with trample and haste, and it essentially has ward, discard a card. So just a card that's kind of it's a decent threat on the board. Platinum Angel. Once again, this is not an Eldrazi, but it is a fun, colorless card and can actually put in some work. 7-drop, 4/4 flying. You can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. That's pretty straightforward. Yes, it dies to removal. It can be pretty easy to get rid of, but it can also put you in some pretty funny situations and everything. It can just be a fun card to play. And this is a deck where it actually makes a ton of sense to run it, considering all the colorless synergy that you have. Pathrazer of Ulamog, 11-drop 9/9 with Annihilator 3, because Annihilator. Pathrazer of Ulamog can't be blocked except by 3 or more creatures, so basically it has triple menace. Pretty good. You're going to be swinging, blowing shit up, and your things aren't going to be able to block, so you're getting in for big damage. Extremely good. Meteor Golem. Again, not an Eldrazi, but it's removal on a stick. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you blow something up. And that's what we need more of that. You need to make sure you have interaction in every deck that you build. Liberator, Urza's Battlethopter. The only reason this card is in the deck is that third thing it says there. You may cast colorless spells and artifact spells as though they had flash. So you can pass your turn and play all of your stuff on your opponent's end steps, giving your opponents not very many chances to respond to your things. Flash speed is extremely good. That's the only reason that this is even in the deck. Same reason with Vidalcan Ori. Playing at instant speed, extremely powerful. Akroma's Memorial. I just thought this would be a really fun card in the deck. So it's a 7-drop artifact. Creatures you control have flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, haste, and protection from black and red. As if all the Eldrazi in this deck weren't strong enough, now they have a bunch of keywords stapled onto them and even more protection. I mean, you drop this thing on the battlefield, people are just, it's going to be absolutely game warping to have this thing in play. That's going to be fun. Ulamog's Crusher, 8-drop, 8/8 with Annihilator 2, because it's an Eldrazi. Ulamog's Crusher attacks each combat if able, which is fine. The second part really isn't even a downside because you want to be attacking with all your big Eldrazi all the time. Next is Titan's Presence. This is a 3-drop instant. We're going to start getting into some of the instants and sorceries and some more of the support cards now. As an additional cost to cast Titan's Presence, reveal a colorless creature card from your hand. That is not a hard requirement to meet. Exile target creature if its power is less than or equal to the revealed card's power. Again, that's not a very hard requirement to meet in this deck, and so this is a cheap, effective piece of removal. All is Dust. It's a board wipe in colorless. 7 colorless mana. Each player sacrifices all permanents they control that are 1 or more colors. In the vast majority of cases, this is going to wipe all of your opponents out, leaving you with a board and them with nothing. Mystic Forge. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may cast artifact spells and colorless spells from the top of your library. Pay 1 life, exile the top card of your library. So basically, this turns the top of your library into an extension of your hand and can really help smooth things out because now all of your spells are colorless or artifacts, so you're going to be able to play every single spell that comes off the top of your deck. And then say you hit a land and you brick. Okay, you can pay 1 life, exile the top card of your library, and then you have a chance to be able to, continue, getting the value off of this by casting cards off the top of your library. There is another interesting way you can use this card that I just now realized as I'm talking about it. If you really wanted to, say you had something like Blightsteel Colossus on the top of your library, you can pay 1 life and exile that card. And you might be wondering, well, why would you want to exile Blightsteel? Well, now when you cast your commander, the biggest mana value at you were guaranteed to at least have Ulamog enter with 12 1/1 counters, meaning that at a minimum, your commander is going to be a 19/19 with Annihilator 12. And there is no world where I have to explain to you why that is absolutely ridiculously strong. Next is Unwinding Clock. Unwinding Clock is going to be very good because the vast majority of the ramp in this deck is Artifact ramp. So now you're untapping all of your artifacts during each other player's untap step, and that'll allow you to play some of your bigger cost instants if you need to. Even if you tap out on your turn, it'll give you opportunities to respond to your opponents. Or if you have either Urza's Battlethopter or Vidalcan Ori out, now you're playing out stuff from your hand on every single player's turn, and your turn, you're basically sharing the turn with each other player, which is insanely good. Warping Whale. A 2-drop instant. Choose one. Exile target creature with power or toughness 1 or less. It can be a piece of removal. Counter target sorcery spell. It can be a counter spell. Create a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi sign creature token. It has sacrifice this creature, add a colorless mana. This can be a piece of ramp. It is super versatile and is a must include in this deck. Desecrate Reality, a 7-drop instant. For each opponent, exile up to 1 target permanent that player controls with an even mana value. This can hit a lot of things and can effectively be a 3-for-1 in most cases. It has Adamant. If at least 3 colorless mana was spent to cast this spell, which it will all be colorless mana, return a permanent card with an odd mana value from your graveyard to the battlefield. So now, say you've had some stuff get removed or things like that, you play Desecrate Reality, you remove up to 3 things, and you get something back. So it can really, really help shift the game back in your favor if you've kind of fallen behind. Scour from Existence, 7-drop exile target permanent, super straightforward, good piece of removal. Spatial Contortion, 2-drop. Target creature gets +3/-3 until end of turn. This can be used as a piece of removal against your opponent's creatures if they have 3 or less toughness, or a pump spell on your creatures if you just need to get a little bit more damage in. Rise of the Eldrazi. This is a whopping 12-cost sorcery. This spell can't be countered. Destroy target permanent. That target player draws 4 cards. Take an extra turn after this one. Exile Rise of the Eldrazi. This is absolutely crazy in this deck, especially if you happen to play it before you cast your commander. So now, you're going to destroy one of your opponent's permanents. Then you are always going to choose yourself to draw 4 cards. So you're going to put 4 cards into your hand, and then you're going to take an extra turn. And then if you happen to cast your commander after this, it's going to enter with 12 1/1 counters, giving it Annihilator 12. This is a very, very good card in this deck. Calamity of the Titans. 6-drop sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, reveal a colorless creature card from your hand. Super easy requirement to meet. Exile each creature or planeswalker with mana value less than the revealed card's mana value. So this is a board wipe that will also hit your board. However, say that your opponent's biggest thing is only a 5-drop. Okay, so you reveal a 5 or a 6-drop from your hand and you would wipe out all of your opponents. And with the cards that you're playing in this deck, you could effectively have things left. You could have several things left and leave your opponents with nothing, creating another instance of a somewhat sort of one-sided board wipe. Introduction to Annihilation. 5-drop exile target non-land permanent. Its controller draws a card. It's another piece of removal. It's a sorcery, so it's not quite as good as Scour from Existence, but it gets the job done. You need removal in this deck. You need to be able to interact, and this allows you to do that. Introduction to Prophecy. A 3-drop scry 2, then draw a card. Can help smooth your hand out earlier in the game. Could be good later in the game if you're looking for a certain piece or a certain creature or something, just to add a little bit more consistency to the deck. Darksteel Monolith. 8-drop artifact, indestructible. Once each turn, you may pay 0 rather than pay the mana cost for a colorless spell you cast from your hand. So it's giving you 1 free spell a turn, which with the spells that you're running in this deck, that is extremely useful. And it says, let's see, once each turn. So you can do it on your turn. Then say you don't have Unwinding Clock, but you have your interaction in your hand. You can still use this on your opponent's turns to cast your removal for free. Planar Bridge. A 6-drop legendary artifact. You pay 8, tap it, search your library for a permanent card, put it onto the battlefield, and shuffle your library. So pay 8, tap it, go find your best creature, go find your best support piece, go find whatever it is you need, and put it onto the battlefield. Pairs really, really well with Unwinding Clock. Okay, every single turn, I'm going to go find the best card that's still in my deck, put it onto the board, and I'm going to swing out. This can very easily help you win the game. Mind's Eye. 5-drop artifact. Whenever an opponent draws a card, you may pay 1. If you do, draw a card. This is just another way to kind of draw some cards. It's a little bit harder to do in colorless, so at a minimum, you could draw 3 cards a turn if you left 3 open mana so that you can draw a card each time one of your opponents draw a card. So it could be more if your opponents are drawing additional cards and stuff. So this can be very, very useful, and again, it pairs super well with something like the Unwinding Clock and can help you fill your hand effectively. The Immortal Sun, 6-drop. Players can't activate Planeswalker's loyalty abilities. So this can work a little bit against you if you happen to have either one of your Ugins out, but you only have 2 Planeswalkers. And one of them, Ugin the Ineffable, still serves a purpose even if this is out, but shutting Planeswalkers down for your opponents could be... I think the other benefits of this card justify its placement in the deck. At the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card, so it's helping you draw cards. Spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, so it effectively ramps you, and creatures you control get +1/+1. It's going to pump everything you got, make you hit even harder. Strionic Resonator. It's a 2-drop artifact. You can pay 2, tap it, copy target triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. This is very good because, again, it allows you to be able to tap this and double up your Annihilator triggers, effectively setting your opponents back even further every time you attack. Now we're on to the land base. The land base has a lot of non-basic lands in it, starting off with Urza's Tron, which is Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, and Urza's Tower. You will not get this out consistently every game. They're lands that come in untapped and tap for colorless. And if you just so happen to be able to get all 3 of them out at the same time, they tap for a total of 7 mana between the 3 of them. So it's a happy accident if you happen to pull it off, and it does not hurt you in any shape, form, or fashion to include these into your land base. Shrine of the Forsaken Gods. Add 1 to your mana pool, add 2 to your mana pool, spend this mana only to cast colorless spells, activate this ability only if you control 7 or more lands. So, again, does not hurt you at all to include this card because it still taps for a colorless and comes in untapped with no negatives. And once you have 7 or more lands, it's tapping for 2, accelerating you in a sense. Temple of the False God, add double colorless, activate this ability only if you control 5 or more lands. It's a land that taps for 2. It's very good. Yes, I have been in some situations in the past where maybe Temple of the False God is your 4th land, and that really, really sucks. But in most cases, you're going to be able to play this, and it's going to tap for 2, and it's going to be great. Eldrazi Temple. Add 1 to your mana pool. Add 2 to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast colorless Eldrazi spells or activate abilities of colorless Eldrazi, which is 95% of the creatures in the deck and your commander, so most of the time this is tapping for 2, but at worst it taps for 1. Eye of Ugin. Colorless Eldrazi spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. 7. Tap it, search your library for a colorless creature card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So this on its own does not tap for mana, but it makes all of your Eldrazi cost 2 less to cast. So it's essentially netting you 2 mana every time you cast an Eldrazi and can be used as a tutor. So it's extremely good and almost necessary in the deck. Urza's Workshop. This is just another like the Urza's Tron lands. If you happen to have Metalcraft, you can, which is not hard to do with all the artifact ramp in the deck, tap it, add colorless for each Urza's land you control, activate only if you control 3 or more artifacts. So, this is the chances of you having at least one other Urza's land, I'd say on an average game are pretty good. So, if you happen to get Urza's Workshop, you can tap it for 2. In a lot of cases, at worst, it taps for 1. Sanctum of Ugin. Add 1 to your mana pool. Whenever you cast a colorless spell with converted mana cost 7 or greater, you may sacrifice Sanctum of Ugin. If you do, search your library for a colorless creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. This is a land that you can sacrifice to go tutor up one of your really big, powerful creatures. Reliquary Tower, you have no maximum hand size, which is really good, and it taps for a colorless. Rogue's Passage, tap to add 1 to your mana pool. 4, tap it, target creature can't be blocked this turn. So now you're sneaking in huge amounts of damage. You pay 4, you're hitting for huge amounts of commander damage or anything else, because you have really, really big, powerful creatures, and this can really help you finish out games. Karn's Bastion. This might be the best land in the game in this deck. You pay 4 and you tap it to proliferate. Now you're proliferating the counters on your commander, and the more counters it has on it, the bigger that Annihilator is. Command Beacon. Taps for a colorless, or you can tap it and sacrifice Command Beacon, put your commander into your hand from the command zone. If your commander has been removed even just once in this, even just once with his mana cost, especially if it's been removed multiple times, it can get a little bit too expensive to cast. Command Beacon is just a way for you to be able to sneak around commander attacks and get your commander back into play. Darksteel Citadel, it's just an indestructible land that taps for colorless, so it's better than a waste. Zalfrin Void, whenever it enters the battlefield, scry 1, it taps for a colorless, so it can help smooth out your draws. Tomb of the Spirit Dragon, you can tap it to add a colorless, or pay 2 and tap it. You gain 1 life for each colorless creature you control, so it can help you gain some life in a hard situation, maybe help keep you alive a little bit, because all of your creatures are going to be colorless. Mirror Pool. This is the first land we have that enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it to add a colorless to your mana pool. You can pay 3 and tap it and sacrifice it and copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. So think about that big, I'm blanking on the name of it, but think about that big spell we had earlier where you destroy something, draw cards, and take an extra turn. If you happen to have the mana open, you can pay 3 and sacrifice this and copy that spell. Or you can copy your removal spells. Or you can pay 5 and tap it and sacrifice it. Put a token onto the battlefield as a copy of target creature you control. So any of, some of your big Eldrazi that have Annihilator, like, Pathrazer of Ulamog or something. Okay, I want 2 of those, and then you're just adding another humongous threat to the board. This thing is really versatile and is a good land to have in this deck. Guideless Commons, that also enters the battlefield tapped. Return a land you control to its owner's hand. You can tap it to add double colorless. It's a bounce land and colorless. Scavenger Grounds. Tap to add colorless. You can tap 2. Tap it, sacrifice a desert, exile all cards from all graveyards. So if you're playing against a graveyard deck, this is an easy way for you to be able to get rid of your opponent's graveyards, having that stapled onto a land. Sanctum of Eternity. Tap to add colorless. You can pay 2, tap it, return target commander you own from the battlefield to your hand. Activate this ability only during your turn. Now, why this is good is if you have enough mana, you can sit here and you can exile half of your opponent's libraries over and over and over again every single turn. That's very good. Drannith Ruins. You can tap to add colorless, or you can pay 2 and tap it. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on target non-human creature that entered the battlefield this turn. So if you happen to have the mana, whenever you play your commander, if you have the 2 extra, you pay the 2 extra into this, you tap it, it gets 2 additional +1/+1 counters, making its Annihilator better by 2. Crystal Grotto, when it enters the battlefield, scry 1, you tap it to add 1, and you can pay 1 and tap it to add 1 mana of any color, which is something that we will never have to do, or in most cases we will never have to do, but it enters the battlefield and allows you to scry to help smooth out your draws. Plaza of Heroes. Tap to add 1. Tap to add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a legendary spell. Tap. Add 1 mana of any color among legendary permanents you control. Or you can pay 3 and tap it. Exile Plaza of Heroes. Target legendary creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So those middle 2 things we never have to worry about. We tap it for a colorless, but in a lot of cases you'll want to hold this up. You'll pay 3, you'll tap it, you'll exile it, and protect your commander. And then the remainder of the deck is simply basic waste. This is exactly how I am going to build this deck from the start. So keep in mind that just because I think that this is going to be the most fun way to build this deck, that there definitely are probably ways that this deck can be better than it is. Matter of fact, it can, because you could be running things like Ancient Tomb or Mana Crypt and things like that, but I don't think you need them. And I think that playing cards of that power level, especially if you're not playing with people who are also playing with cards of that power level, can really unbalance the game and just make it an unfun game experience. So for me, I think this is the best way to build this deck to have the optimal gameplay experience, to have fun, interactive games. With that being said, that doesn't mean that this deck will also be like this forever. Keep in mind that when you build a deck, the way you initially put it together is not going to always be the best way for it to be put together for you or your play group. And the only way to really optimize a deck to make the best gameplay experience is to play test the deck both on your own and get games, in with other people. See how it plays and don't be afraid to make adjustments and tweak your deck. It's hard to take cards out that you really want to play, but sometimes cards are just underperforming, or they're not, really working out the way you had hoped they would. And it can be hard to take out cards that you really, really want to play with, but sometimes that's the best decision to make. So do not be afraid to tweak your decks. Play test them and change what's necessary. So with that being said, I really hope that you found something that you liked in this video today, and maybe this gave you an idea. Maybe this is a commander you've considered building yourself, and you like this deck and you want to put it together, or it's showing you some cards that you didn't really know about. With that being said, I hope you all have a wonderful time, and I hope to see you again next time. Y'all have a good one.